afternoon, everyone. It's good to be here with our friends from Nomura Research Institute. Today we are going to discuss a very important topic about Thailand-Plus-One. This idea of Thailand-Plus-One is not originated by Thai people, but interestingly by Japanese people. And they have a plan which obviously will affect us, Thai people, because Japanese is the main investor in Thailand and in this region. So what they are doing is really of interest to us. And we are very curious to know what are they really thinking about Thailand-Plus-One, and what would be the implication for Thailand. And at least we are glad that we are still on the map, Thailand-Plus-One. I used to hear that Japanese have a strategy of China-Plus-One. And the one is ASEAN country. And now we learn that the one is Thailand. And it becomes Thailand-Plus-One. And if we listen to seminars, listen to Japanese business leaders like Toyota chairperson talk, we learn that they are really cautious about investment in Thailand at the moment. So at least we are glad that we are still having Thailand-Plus-One. Thailand is still on the map. So let's hear from our colleagues from Nomura Research Institute. I'm sure they have lots of things to tell us, and we will be curious to know. So please get on, start with the session.
Thank you very much for a very warm introduction. Let me take this opportunity to introduce myself as well as the Nomura Research Institute Thailand. My name is Kengo. I'm the Managing Director of the Nomura Research Institute Thailand. And actually, Nomura Research Institute is a basically research and consulting firm based in Japan, but not only Japan, but also in other parts of Asia. But fortunately or unfortunately, it is the only last year when we incorporated our subsidiary here in Thailand. So it's very grateful for us to have this seminar alongside with the TDRI, which is a very prestigious organization here in Thailand. So my topic today is, as Dr. Somkyo said, the Thailand-Plus-One. When Japanese used to say China-Plus-One, it was rather a sort of the risk aversion apart from China. So Japan is seeing and has seen a very risky political and economic situation, relationship with China. So when Japanese talked about the China-Plus-One, the one is the one to avert from Chinese risk, or to be separate geographically, economically, and politically from China. But in case of Thailand-Plus-One, it's rather connected, and people see Thailand-Plus-One as a sort of the regional development landscape. So in this sense, the terminology seems to sound alike each other, but the context is quite different. I'm going to explain. So today's topic, we have a four topics. One is the Thai, just a confirmation or review of Thai economic relations, Thai-Japan economic relationship, which has been very fruitful and robust in the past and in the future. The second one is the Thai-Plus-One, what's all about it. The number three, the third topic is the case studies, and the fourth topic is benefits, challenges, and going first for Thailand. Okay, so Thailand, as you may know, this is, geographically speaking, this is the hub in manufacturing and transport in Great Mekong sub-region, which basically consists of the southern part of China, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Myanmar. And ASEAN is consisting of 10 countries, but we believe that Thailand is at least the center of this northern part of the ASEAN, or Great Mekong sub-region. If we compare the Japanese travelers, I mean, not only for business but also for tourists included, the Japanese traveler to ASEAN countries, as you see, Thailand has outnumbered other countries like Singapore or Vietnam. So this shows that how Japanese really like to travel to Japan, and the number of the Japanese travelers in 2012 was nearly 1.4 million per annum. On the other hand, thanks to the deregulation of the visa requirements since last July, the number of Thai people coming to Japan is also dramatically increasing, as shown on the right-hand side. So we are seeing the nearly 500,000 Thai people coming to Japan, like Hokkaido or some other part of the area of Japan are welcoming many Thai tourists. And not only the exchange in people, but also the exchange in companies and economies are also booming. As you see on the left-hand side, the number of Japanese Chambers of Commerce members are again the top here in the Bangkok, followed by Singapore and Ho Chi Minh City. So as you see, the Bangkok is really the number one business location for most of Japanese companies in ASEAN. Also, when we look at the Japanese expats, residents, in terms of the country, Thailand ranks as number 3. And we estimate, unlike other competing countries like the US, China, or UK, which has a rather strict regulation in visa and stay requirements, Thailand has a sort of the relaxed regulation than next. So we estimate that the Japanese living in Thailand is more than 50,000. It's nearly 100,000. That's a rough estimate.
Are there any illegal Japanese living in Thailand?
Legally and illegally, yes. I believe most of the Japanese now attending here is mostly legal, except for me, maybe. And when you look at the trading partners with Thailand, Japan is the number 3 destination for Thailand in terms of export, and Japan is the largest country from the people in Thailand in terms of the imports. So thanks to Thai companies based in Thailand, and thanks to Thai people, Japan has a trade surplus against Thailand, significantly. But anyway, this shows the strong economic relationship between Thailand and Japan. And this table shows how Japanese companies in general look or rank the foreign countries as a promising investment site. So in terms of the sales function, in terms of the production, in terms of research and development, and in terms of the logistics, Thailand is ranked as the top 2 following China. So this again shows how Japanese companies are taking the Thailand as a good site for investment in various areas of businesses. And this shows the FDI outstanding or stock of Japanese company in manufacturing sectors. So as you see in Asia, so the Thailand is second largest after China, and outnumbering that Indonesia, India, and even Malaysia. So this shows how the Japanese company has made a huge investment in the past to Thailand. Also, from the viewpoint of the Thailand, the BOI data shows the investment approved by BOI, more than half of it has been Japanese, at least last year's concern. So again, this shows that the strong economic tie. And in terms of the FDI flow, this is annual inflow per annum. The FDI from Japan is also highest amongst major ASEAN economies, and it's way higher than to Indonesia, Vietnam, and the Philippines. On the other hand, when we look at the FDI from all over the world, not only from Japan, but also from other countries, actually it is Indonesia which attracted the most investment from the world until 2012. So this shows unlike other people, how Japanese really like to travel and to invest in Thailand. But this also shows some potential phenomenon that the Japanese are also looking at quite positively in Indonesia nowadays. Then let's jump on to the Thailand-Plus-One. What's all about it? So Thailand-Plus-One is essentially the concept wherein the companies, especially Japanese manufacturers, make manufacturing productions in linkage with some other sub-factories in surrounding areas or surrounding countries like Cambodia, Laos, PDR, or even Vietnam, or maybe in the future, Myanmar. So Thailand-Plus-One, and one means one of those neighboring countries. So it's ain't no insult to those countries, but it's rather the giving an opportunity for them to attract more investment from Japanese company, especially from Japanese company based in Thailand. So we are going to see some examples, emerging examples. So this is the list of the recent Japanese companies who made a big investment to Cambodia. And interestingly, many of those companies are operating and investing from Thai subsidiary. So the situation is like the Thai is a mother factory or mother company, and the factory or company in Cambodia is like their children. So Minebia and Sumi Wiring Harness and Yazaki, all of those companies are essentially wire harness company, which is the sort of the raw value-added products amongst the automotive industry. And then also started to make a small investment in Phnom Penh for their sensor parts for motorbike generator. Another trend is to Laos, TDRI. As you may know, the Nikon, which has been quite severely hit by the flood in Ayutthaya 2011, has decided to move part of their manufacturing cluster, manufacturing part to Savannakhet, Laos PDR, and they have started operation from last year. The same situation is more or less like a Toyota Bosch, which is the car sheet maker, basically for Toyota, and also some other Asahi or Daiichi Denshi. Those companies are also making an investment in Savannakhet or Vientiane. And it's interesting to know that many of those companies are also again investing from Thai subsidiary, and their operations is managed by Thai subsidiary or Thai managers also. So it's quite interesting. Then the reason why the Thai-Plus-One is occurring, we believe that there are three compelling reasons. The number one is the labor shortage. As you may know, here in Thailand, the labor shortage is quite severe, and unemployment rate is less than 1%. So it's nearly full employment is achieved. The number two reason is the wage hike in Thailand. For the better or worse, as you may know, the minimum wage has been hiked, and monthly salary of factory workers here in Thailand is nowadays more or less at par with those in China. And the number three reason is the business environment improvement in Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. Not only AEC or after, but also the infrastructure development is undergoing. Let me explain one by one. So, aging society in Thailand. As you can see on the pyramid of the population pyramid of Thailand, actually population, actually the pyramid is only the good word for Philippine case. But Thailand, we should say it's like a pagoda. It's not a pyramid. So it sees how the Thailand has started to age, And the median age of the Thailand is 35 years old, whereas the median age in Philippines 23 years old, Cambodia 22 years old. So they are quite young countries. And no insult to my home country, Japan, but Japan has a median age of 45 years old, which is actually at the same age with me. So this shows how the working age population is going to increase or decrease amongst major ASEAN economies. So in case of the Thailand, the working population age is going to peak out sometime in coming years. Whereas Indonesia and the Philippines, they are going to still enjoy the bonus of the working age booming. So this is the root cause for the high employment rate and high wages as well. So this shows the factory worker salary of 2010 and 13 as far as Japanese manufacturers are concerned. So as you can see, Thailand wage per month is around 360, which is more or less at par with those in China. Whereas, for example, in the Philippines, Indonesia, they are nearly more than $100 cheaper. And Vietnam is less than half. And Laos and Cambodia is nearly 1/3 of those in Thailand. So there is a significant difference in labor cost. And the number three compelling reason why the Thailand-Plus-One is occurring is actually the improvement and in infrastructure and some services. So as you may know, the GMS was initiated by Asian Development Bank, and the number of investment has been made by ADB, JICA, and even Thai government through NEDA. So a number of, and of course, not to mention the Chinese Exim Bank. So the infrastructure development has been made, and as you may know, the Thailand has seen the fourth Thai-Lao friendship bridge between Kengo and Huesai, Laos, last December. So those missing link has been missing. So in a sense, it's a very good situation in terms of the development of the infrastructure. Although they have still the underdeveloped part, and that needs to be done for improvement. And this shows how Japanese has recently invested to Cambodia, Myanmar, and Laos. As you can see, roughly speaking, Cambodia has accepted more or less 30 to 40 million US dollar during the several years. Whereas Myanmar and Laos is also starting to receive those investments. Although these figures is far little from, as compared to those figures to Thailand. For example, from Japan to Thailand annually, it's around 400,000 or 4 billion US dollar. So the figure is just around 100 to those countries. But still, this is a sort of the emerging point of these trends, we believe. So the one of the underlying reasons why the Japanese companies are nowadays quite positively looking at those surrounding countries is one of the reasons is of course AEC and CEP and after. And this is especially important to Thailand because, as you may know, the AFTA has been effective since 2010 amongst the pioneer member countries of ASEAN, such as like Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia. But from what's going to change from 2015 and on is that the CLV country was Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam. They are also are going to be integrated into this common FTA gradually. So those countries are the one who surrounds the Thailand. So the most impact is going to be on Thailand and its neighboring countries. So we believe that this will also expose some opportunities as well as challenges to Thai and Japanese companies operating here in Thailand. And from case studies on, a colleague of mine, Mr. Nakabayashi, has made a case study trip to Cambodia and Laos. So I think I deserve the right to assign my responsibility to him from now.
Hello everyone, my name is Nakabayashi from Nomura Research Institute. Now I'm working at the TDRI as intern since last October. I'm happy to see you because 2 weeks ago, advanced registration, only one person. Thank you for coming to today.
They could not get into their office. That's why.
So next chapter, we will show the 3 case studies. First is shift to low value process to the Cambodia. Second is a shift to low value process to Laos. And third is efficient market access to Cambodia. Okay, first is shifting low value process to Cambodia. This is a case of the Yazaki. Yazaki is a car part supplier for the manufacturing for automotive assemblers. Wire harness is a very labor-intensive product. As you know, the make from the gathering the electric wire. So Yazaki has a factory in Thailand and Bangkok, and they provide the electric wire to the Cambodia Kokon. They set up the new factory at Kokon 2012. The factory in Cambodia make a wire harness and ship back to the Bangkok, and they sell the wire harness to the car assembler as a Toyota.
What is the number of workers in Yazaki?
Yazaki, around Kokon, the 600. They start 600, but their future plan around 3,000. The benefit of this model is first is cheap labor cost. Cambodian worker salary, Mr. Mizuno said, is lower than Thai workers. And so Kokon is a bit near border. So logistics can use almost Thai road. Thai road condition is better than Cambodia. So there is no problem to provide raw materials regularly. And next case is Nikon. And let's see this video.
Nikon opened a new assembly operation in Laos called Nikon Lao Company Limited to expand the production base of its photographic products. Officials said Nikon saw great potential in the Thailand-Plus-One special economic zone following the installation of all the necessary infrastructure. The $8 million plant in the Thailand-Plus-One special economic zone in central Savannah Khel province is set for operation next month, with its primary purpose being the assembly of digital SLR single-lens reflex camera units. Deputy Prime Minister in charge of Economic Affairs, Somsavat Linsavat, Japanese Ambassador to Laos, Junko Yokota, and representatives from Nikon attended the official opening ceremony of the plant after its 6-month construction, according to official sources. Up to 200 Lao nationals have been trained in preparation for working at the new plant once operations begin, which is expected to be next month.
Back to the slide. Nikon opened a new factory, Savannah SEZ. So their operation is, they have a Thai factory in Ayutthaya province. So they send a semi-final product to the Laos and assembling at the Laos and back to the Ayutthaya factory and inception to ship to all over the world. So the benefit of this model is cheaper labor cost too, but the next Thai language communicable with Lao. This is important for this kind of product because the Thai manager can coach the Lao workers. This is one of the advantages of this model. And Nikon was damaged flat in 2011 in Ayutthaya province. They are interested in the business continuity planning, so they choose the Lao factory, Savannah SEZ. In the future, the Lao factory grows as well as the Thai factory. If they cannot operate at the Thai factory, they can operate Lao factory. They can continue to operate their business. So next is different from the previous cases. This is Ajinomoto. So Ajinomoto built a packing plant at the Phnom Penh SEZ, but they have been already expanded their business in Cambodia. But they set up a new factory because before they shipped final product to Cambodia, but the road condition was very bad in Cambodia. Some kind of the product was damaged, cannot sell. So they want to avoid the risk of the damaged product. They set up a new factory for packing process. And now they ship to the Ajinomoto and the package of the bulk, package of the 1 ton bulk. It is so efficient to the logistics than ship to the final product. So we explain the detailed information of their operation, especially and focus on the logistics. And they ship to the Thailand factory to the Cambodia. They need a 3-day, 2-night. Monday is a loading container in the unit of bulk from the Thai factory, and they transport to the border and change the truck at the border because Thailand is a right handle, Cambodia is a left handle. There's a different traffic regulations. And Tuesday afternoon, they arrived at the Phnom Penh at midnight. And next day, Wednesday, is a custom inspection at the special economic zone. So this model, the benefit of this model is reduce logistic cost and avoid the risk of the damage of the product. These are case studies. Next, we like to talk about the benefit and challenges of the Thailand-Plus-One model. The first benefit is strengthens the international competitiveness of Thailand. First is Thailand tapping the abundant cheap labor force on neighboring countries. Only Thailand, around 60 million, Thailand population is 60 million, but the Cambodian, Laos, plus Cambodia and Laos and Myanmar is around for 140 million. This is a huge labor force and market size. And upsizing the market size by the regional integration. And finally, the Thai labor force is limited. If the Thai labor continue to work at the labor intensive, they cannot shift to the high value add process. So to shift the human resource to the high value address, it needs to integrate and shift to the low value process to the neighboring countries. So key factor is to realize that Thailand-Plus-One model is a connectivity and Thailand initiative. So this framework is a component of the business environment. The blue one is an infrastructure as a road, port, the bridge. Yellow is institutional software infrastructure as a government policy, regulations, and business customs. And finally, blue one is a business activity by the private sector, a business model, and the new development, new technology, development a new business model. So each area has some issue and challenges. We will talk about this. First is investing in infrastructure. Second is reducing the non-tariff barrier and non-tariff measurement as a cross-border procedure. Third is investing the R&D. Fourth is challenging the function of Thai managers. First is investment infrastructure in Asean countries. The gross capital formation rate is still lower than Indonesia and Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam, Thailand need to more invest to the infrastructure to improve their hub infrastructures. Thailand should be support to the neighboring country development. Next topic is software infrastructure about cross-border land transportation. Because as economic integrate after the integrated the demand of the land transportation will be increased, but there is some inefficient issues at the border. For example, customer clearance procedure and inspection at the border is not effective because if the truck passes across the border, they have to do the 2 times exit from Thailand enter to the Cambodia. So the cross-border transportation agreement suggests these solutions, single window and single stop the service and the consistency with customer business hour. But now these solutions it is not realized still now. So next example is a limitation of the truck passport. Truck passport means the license of the vehicle, mutual service that the vehicle can go Thailand and neighboring country as a pass through. But so it is difficult to get the license, especially the Japanese logistics provider. They said that they want to know how to get the passport. It needs more transparency of the acquired to the passport. And last is custom clearance procedure for the purpose of the transit. So if the truck go to the Vietnam, Thailand from the Vietnam, the Cambodia only transit, not stop at the Cambodia. But now the truck need to the custom procedure each the border regularly need a regularly process. It is so not efficient for the transit case. The CBTA suggests to create effective custom system and regulation for the transit. So these three solutions suggested by the CBTA in 2007, but still now it is not realized. And next is business activity, especially R&D. The Thailand R&D expenditure is still lower than advanced countries. Thailand spends R&D only 0.3% of the GDP, and so high-tech export is still low. Thailand have to invest, especially R&D process, such as developing new technology and design. Also, BOY suggests the new policy of the BOY focus on this kind of area. I heard. So I think so that Thailand should be focused on the R&D expenditure. So next is changing the function of time managers. So function means a working style and professional duty and mindset. So labor skill and productivity is still low in Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar. So this picture, left side of this picture is internal school of the basic manner at the Japanese factory. And the teacher teach about the Cambodian, how to read the Cambodian character and how to count the number. If you said meet another person to say hello, it's very, very basically. But if they don't do such things, the new employee cannot remember the words. So this school for new employee for the time to the 2 weeks, and after that, they provide a professional training for new employees. And right side is a factory in Laos. The manager said that their productivity is still low. Their productivity is as half as a Thai worker yet. So the Lao worker need to more training and experience to improve their productivity. So until now, Thailand is learned from the Japan or the advanced countries. But now Thailand have to teach the surrounding countries how to work and provide the knowledge and experience to the neighboring countries. This is an important point of the real regional integration. Okay, that's all.
So again, so we believe the Thailand-Plus-One concept and realization is beneficial to Thai people, Thailand, and neighboring countries, also, as well as the Japanese company operating here in this region. So challenges are fourfold. Well, as Mr. Nakabayashi said, the investing in infrastructure, reducing non-tariff barriers, investing in R&D, and changing the functionality of Thai managers, and I'd like to put Japanese managers as well. So we are going for this workshop and this presentation. It's still at the sort of the integral one, and the findings is still preliminary, and we are going to work on this. We're going to still keep working on this alongside with TDRI. So we are going to make an interview with not only Japanese companies, but also JETRO, or Japanese governmental agencies, as well as the BOI, NEDA, NESDP, and some scholars, Tamasa, Chura, all those things. And we are going to deliberate, and we are going to also meet with 8 human resource development experts, and some R&D function companies of Japanese companies like Toyota or Honda. They all of them have set up that R&D centers here in Thailand, but operating for quite little things. So we're going to discuss with what has been the impediment for them.
You should also involve Thailand Innovator and Department of Trade Negotiation.
Yes.
Department of Trade Negotiation is the core agency to negotiating things like this.
Yes, we will be very much happy to do so if they come to the office. when times comes, when they come to the office. Okay, thank you very much. And so going forward, we are going to work with the TDRI and some other counterparties until late this year. And we shall be able to come back with more concrete findings, as well as the development scenario, and what Thailand has to do, and what Japanese companies and what Thailand has to do for advancing or enhancing this Thailand-Plus-One concept, and which would be the regionally beneficiary to surrounding countries, as well as Thailand and Japan. So lastly, I would like to conclude our presentation by expressing our sincere appreciation for organizer TDRI and allied and distinguished guests and researchers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mizuno-san and Nakabayashi-san. First of all, my name is Chedtha, Intaravitak. I'll be the second presenter, and since Dr. Somkiat is not here, so I guess I will have to take the role of the moderator in this session. Okay, I think your preliminary research findings is very insightful, and I myself learned a lot. The presenters have presented the concept of Thailand-Plus-One. What is Thailand-Plus-One? And give interesting case studies in Laos, Cambodia, and provide us with the challenge, the benefits, and future directions of this model. So, any comments or questions on this, please?
Yes, you mentioned about the problem of labor shortage in Thailand, so that's why there is the model of Thailand-Plus-One. But if Thailand has the national policy of minimum wage, say $10 per day, and a lot of workers from neighboring countries come to Thailand to work as workers, so if we keep this in mind, and I have questioned that, say, workers in provinces nearby Thailand, they have more incentive to come to Thailand to work in Thailand. So it will be difficult for factories to hire workers in those areas. Do you have this information?
Yes, actually, I think the largest reason why many factories used to sort of the import labor from neighboring countries is that there was no other way for them to do so. In other words, it doesn't very difficult for them to locate their factories across the border in the past. But nowadays, the infrastructure is quite developed, or at least improving on those beyond the borders. So they can now operate. That's number one. Number two, still, you can sort of import the laborers to some extent. And it is said that there are 3 million illegal or legal workers from Myanmar operating here, and maybe nearly 1 million from Cambodia and Laos in total. But that's not necessarily sustainable in a sense. And essentially, they may want to revert back to their home country if the situation allows and environment allows. And I believe that even for AEC blueprint, the freedom of the non-skilled labor is not included in it. So I think that what the AEC as a target is trying to achieve is that the more integrated in terms of operation, not necessarily the labor itself.
Let's say, okay, may say like, okay, say workers in Sawanakhet or Gong, they may get about $5 per day, but if they move to Thailand, they get about $10 per day. So they have more incentive to work in Thailand, and it seems that maybe if like the wage in Thailand keeps increasing, so workers in neighboring countries will come to Thailand more and more. And then if the factories like say move to CLM, then it will be more difficult in the future to get workers or not.
Okay, I get your point. From the workers' viewpoint, that may be true, at least for the meantime. But from the viewpoint of the investors or factories or managers, the things are the other way around. That's number one. And number two, as you may know, the Laos and Myanmar is not so much populated, unlike in this country, Thailand. So the wild card would be Myanmar, which has more or less the same number of the people, and which is still industrialization is still underdeveloped. So I believe that they give them more opportunities for this concept. And Cambodia Lao PDR, yes, they can help for the meantime. But at the end of the day, they have a quite limited number of the sort of the skilled laborers or educated people, which are good for minimum factory workers.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess Dr. Samrat's point is that will Japanese company have problem recruiting workers? Because when wage in Thailand increase, workers in these neighboring countries will come to Thailand. Will Japanese have companies that move their operation to these modern countries have problem recruiting workers? Will this model feasible at all?
Some Japanese factory officers said at the Phnom Penh has already been shortage the worker. They do the recruit caravan for the rural area. And so because a lot of factory pay attention to Phnom Penh and invest in Phnom Penh area, there is a lot of factory, but the population, the number of workers, it's not enough to satisfy the demand. They want to get an employee from the rural side.
So the problem exists.
Yes.
There is problem recruiting workers.
And now the Vientiane area too. Is it okay?
Okay, the office is next to me, so I can ask you later.
I think that's an interesting issue. So, please.
You're presenting as if it's a win-win situation whereby Japanese company win and Thai company may win as well in distribution of labor and factory. I wonder if it will be really a winning they thinking of maintaining a more higher value-adding operation in Thailand? What's your thinking about this?
Yes, actually that's what we are going to figure out by the end of this study. But our hypothesis is that the Japanese company will essentially remain here, especially as far as the high to mid value processes are concerned. And this is going to be the hub of the manufacturing, especially for automotive and electronics industries. And they will not be moved from Thailand. It's no essential part will be moved. As I said, the investment from Japanese company in Thailand to Laos and Myanmar is booming. But as compared to the figures from Japan to Thailand, it's quite one hundredth. So it's still low. So I'm saying that they're relocating very part of their functions or part of the manufacturing process, especially at the lower end, to Cambodia or Laos as a sort of the trial cases nowadays.
I have a question. There was discussion that Thailand is often referred to the hub because of our geographical location, but also we have a skilled labor force, like you were talking about. But there's also a question whether or not what do Japanese companies see as the real strength of Thailand besides geographical and skilled labor? Is there anything else? Because there was also talks about tax, you know, and how you can manufacture at one area, and you don't have to pay tax because you assemble it in another area. I really don't want to go too much, but I really want to see what is your insight into the strength of Thailand and what do we need to do more to stay competitive?
Yes, there has been several studies as well as questionnaire surveys regarding that part, especially that pertains to the presentation, which was the part one. Why Japanese companies are so coming to Thailand, and why so Japanese are loving Thailand over Indonesia or other countries. There have been several reasons said. Number one, infrastructure has been relatively well developed here in Thailand. Number two, Buddhism, whereas Indonesia is Muslim, and Japanese are not necessarily accustomed to that religion. I'm not saying that they can cooperate but they can cooperate and co-work, but they are not necessarily know much about it. And the number three, stability in politics. I'm not saying whether red or yellow, but we have known that King has the final say, which has been a very important thing here in Thailand. And they have seen the moral situation as compared to Japanese emperor system. So the king has the final say. That's it. That's very that gives us sort of the comfort to Japanese investors. And the way of attitude and the way of people and the thinking. That has been also more similar.
And one more reason, there is already had established the industrial cluster. There are many supporting industry. If Toyota relocated Laos, but there is no part suppliers, so they need to the cluster. And so Thailand has an industrial cluster. It is a very important reason, I think.
So we believe that Thailand is going to be still the hub in terms of the economies of scale and the economies of variety. Please go ahead.
My name is Chen from Federation of Thai Industries. I just wonder if when we are saying that the labor-intensive, low-value-added work will be moved to neighboring countries, what about the higher functions, designing, research development, product development? Will it be moved from Japan to Thailand?
very interesting, good question, I think. Yes, some manufacturers like auto assemblers like Toyota, Honda, they have all set up R&D company here in Thailand. But their operational functionality has been so far quite limited as those compared to R&D centers in the US or other R&D centers in Japan. There are several reasons. One is, of course, as we have shown that the R&D ratio is quite low here in Thailand. So it's quite difficult for hiring a quite good for high-tech skilled laborers or researchers or scientists. That's number one. Number two is the tariff also matters. For example, when the Japanese car maker wants to import part of the new car just for testing purpose, but still the cost that applies to as exactly same as to those which going to be sold here in Thailand. So when they want to make a car testing, and the car testing includes, for example, crash test, that's not ain't enough for sale, but they have to pay tax. Or in the case of the US, when they export it to the US, they don't tax on it. So it's easier for them to make such R&D function. For example, in case of the automaker. So I think the sort of the tariff and non-tariff barriers should be also removed or eased for this country to be more shifted onto the high value part of the manufacturing processes.
I sort of have a question built on Mr. Chen's question. So what would be the kind of technology transfer that will likely happen in the Thailand+One model? So if you move some high value added activities to Thailand, would there be a technology transfer to domestic workers? Why would that be? What would be the rationales for doing that, for example?
You mean from not from Japan to Thailand, but from Thailand to neighboring countries?
Like if Japan set up design or technology development department in Thailand, a high value added activities, how much of this knowledge and skills will be transferred to domestic managers, for example?
That's very difficult to answer in a quantitative manner. Do you have an answer?
Actually, really depends on the company, their strategy, what kind of function to be located in Thailand. But nowadays, for example, Toyota is doing business not only in ASEAN countries but also all over the world. So they have to set up R&D center in India, in some other parts, or they are doing business in Africa. So only the headquarters in Nagoya cannot take care of all R&D activities all over the world. So they want to delegate some discretion to the Thai R&D center, especially for ASEAN cars or Thai cars targeted to Thai market or ASEAN market. They want the Thai R&D center to do the R&D activities completed here in Thailand. So in that sense, they transfer some technology to Thai people. But for example, the development of platform or the core engine system, which is very, very important, and the source of money, they may want to keep in Nagoya, in Japan. So it depends. Like if you want to design some shift lever for ASEAN market, well, you can do it in Thailand. But for those very basic core technologies, they may do transfer bit by bit, not in at once time.
So that is actually incentive to transfer technology to Thai people, because the Nagoya headquarters in and of itself cannot handle. Please.
It seems like you talk about medium stream and downstream industry in order to support Thailand-Plus-One. But how about the weakness of Thailand in terms of upstream industry, such as upstream of steel industry? So I would like you to explain what you think about the upstream industry in order to support the theme of Thailand-Plus-One as well. And the second question is probably forgot about SME industry. We talk about the last 2 years, we talk about fund for this time, SME will come to this region. How about the situation now?
Yes, the second question first. SMEs, yes, they're coming quite furiously. The number of it's very hard to count because they are not necessarily the member, they may not necessarily be the member of Japanese chamber. So it's very hard to count, but people or some figures say that around every year around 100 companies or more are coming to Thailand for establishing not only manufacturing but also investment in service sectors, like Japanese small ramen shop or sushi shop or even some catering services. All those things they are doing as a sort of the individual business, also the SME business. So they are furiously coming. Yes, true. And the landscape is it used to be manufacturing dominantly, but nowadays, especially during the past few years, it's nearly half and half. I mean, the manufacturing and services in terms of the number of the investment. The number two, when it comes to steel making, I'm not necessarily expert on that particular sector. But I think that I believe, to the best of my knowledge, I used to be in the Philippines for 8 years, and the Philippines didn't have any what you call the steel maker, domestic steel maker. And Thailand, I'm afraid, there is no domestic hard steel maker yet. Whereas the Vietnam is going to have it alongside with the joint venture with Japanese company in coming years. So that is going to change a sort of the fundamental competitiveness, because steel is the infrastructure of the company, especially when it comes to manufacturing, as you may know. So that's going to change, may alter the landscape of this GMS region in terms of the manufacturing. Yoda-san, do you remember the name of the company which is going to make a joint venture with the Vietnamese counterpart in Vietnam? Steel maker. What is it? Synthesis. Nippon Steel? That's actually one of the big reasons why the Japanese steel maker has decided to make investment in Vietnam is that they have a rather big shipbuilding industries. Shipbuilding does use a huge amount of steels, and the Vietnam and the Philippines are known for shipbuilding amongst ASEAN countries. That gives them the good reason.
Any other questions, comments, please? I have one question. So when we talk about Thailand-Plus-One, I have read the paper, and the paper refers to Thailand plus SEZ, and especially the SEZ during the along the borders. And I think part of that is because we can use mostly Thai transport system, which presumably might be better than Cambodia or Laos transport system. So when we talk about Thailand-Plus-One in the future, Are we talking about Thailand plus other ACC inside the country, and how important would be the transport and logistics in those countries for this model?
Yes, so far the Thailand-Plus-One has been more on the perimeter alongside with Thai borders. So essentially there has been less efforts or less struggle for companies to make a transport or logistics between those areas. But eventually, yes, as you said, it needs to go beyond or further beyond the border from the people in Thailand, especially when it comes to Myanmar. Yes, the Thai border with Myanmar border with Thai is not plain. It's just basically mountainous area. So when you want to make logistics, yes, it needs to go further. And as you may know, the road in the side of the Myanmar is quite underdeveloped. And I believe the NEDA, or neighboring economic countries development cooperation agency of Thai government, is assisting or financing road development there. So we are going to make an interview with them right now.
Any other questions, comments? Please.
Just a small question. What is the output of this study, and what you gonna do next once you are finished your study?
We plan to have the final seminar or workshop like this style or more bigger style, and we are going to present our presentation, our final findings, as well as we will be able to make some sort of a report presented to the participants or interested people. And also for the seminar or workshop, we also intend to invite speakers from not only from NRI and TDRI, but also from some Japanese manufacturers or some governmental agencies or industry associations as well. So it's going to be a more big workshop to present the first final findings. That's going to be maybe in September or October this year. So half a year later.
For this part, I will present an update on the TDRI study about trade barriers and logistics, especially in the GMS area. So right now, we don't have like our positions in our views on the Thailand-Plus-One model, because that is actually a project I'm working on right now. So it's an ongoing project. But we have done some works that is related to this area. And I hope that my presentation will provide sort of a context about the regional connectivity in which the Thailand-Plus-One model will be operating on in the future. So I think the main research theme that we have done in this area is about the cost of international trade. So if you imagine the goods that is being shipped from country A to country B, what are the different types of costs of international trade? We can have tariff, we can have non-tariff measures, we can have transport costs, right? Transport costs here means like shipping by air, maritime, or by land. Okay, we group that and we call that transport facilitation. And we can have other costs, such as customs procedures and other institutional costs, and we group that and call that trade facilitation. So I think our main research questions evolve around these three things. So first, we ask, what is the current status of those costs? Okay. Second, how successful are we at reducing these costs? And finally, what are the effects on the Thai economy from this cost reduction? Okay, I think those are our key research questions in this area. So my presentation will be a brief summary of our findings for each one of these topics. Okay. On tariff reduction, okay, we know that we have AFTA, and AFTA have some scheduled tariff reduction. Right? How much progress have we made on that front? To be qualified for tariff reduction, you have to prove that your product is produced in Thailand, for example. So the rules of origins become important, and I will also talk about our findings on that front too. Okay. Now, as we all know that the tariff rate for most products in NAFTA is approaching zero. So the non-tariff measures will become more and more important issues in the future. So I will discuss our findings on that too. Okay, and then I will talk about trade and transport facilitation, draw some policy implications, and discuss our further research in this area. Okay, on tariff reduction. The first finding is that we found that tariff barriers between Thailand and FTA partners is becoming a less important issue. And that's because tariff rates for most trading goods between Thailand and FTA partners have been reduced to zero. Okay, very few remaining positive tariff lines. Okay. If you take a look at this diagram shows the ratio of the trade value that have zero tariff as a ratio to the total trade value. As you can see from the export side, please take a look at the orange line and the purple line. Okay. The orange line is the Thai export to other ASEAN 5 countries, other original ASEAN countries like Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, Indonesia, and Philippines. Okay. So about 90% of Thai export already has a tariff rate of zero. What about CLMV countries? CLMV countries, we are still at about 25%. So in a sense, CLMV countries just joined after, and they have just opened the economy. So they are somewhat protecting their domestic market to a certain extent. Okay, so that's there are still a bunch of products that still have non-zero tariff. How about the import side? Okay, if you take a look at this diagram on the right-hand side and focus on the orange and the purple line. Thailand pretty much opened its domestic market to everybody. Okay, so ASEAN 5 can export to Thailand, CLMV can export to Thailand, and zero tariff rate for almost all products. Okay, what about Japan? Japan is the blue line here. Okay, so Thai export to Japan, about 80% of the trade value has zero tariff rate. How about the import side? Thailand, compared to Japan, Thailand still protects its domestic market more than Japan does. Only about 75% of the product imported from Japan has a zero tariff. So the message is that the tariff is approaching zero. But of all these products that have zero tariff, how much Thai private sectors actually utilize this tariff preference? Okay. How much Thai private sector actually apply and being granted this tariff preference? That's the next slide. Okay, so this next slide, I think this finding is quite striking. We find that Thai private sectors have not fully reaped the tariff benefits. Okay. So we compute these numbers called utilization rates. So it says it's a ratio between the trade that is being utilized, this tariff preference by private sectors. They apply for it and they get it, compared to the total trade that have zero tariff preference. Okay, so let's take a look at this diagram on the left-hand side. So for all ASEAN countries that Thailand export to, we are utilizing only about 40% of the right that we can use. Okay, so we can get a tariff reduction for $100 values export, for example, but we are using only about 40%. Why? Okay, from our research team, we think it's pretty low, and it's like the money left on the street, waiting for someone to pick up. Okay, why is that not enough people to pick it up? Okay, and this number is even more striking if we consider Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. Okay. The utilization rate is almost negligible. It's like 3%, 4%, 5%. Okay. What is causing this? Okay. Some of the factors that explain the low utilization for CLM countries are the following. So we found that the lack of competency of the customs officers in CLM countries is part of the reason. The small traders in the border areas cannot provide the cost structure of their products, so they are just traders. they buy products from manufacturing plants in Bangkok, for example, and they just ship this across border. So they cannot provide the cost structure. And the cost structure is a requirement to get a tariff preference. So that's part of the reason for low utilization of export to these CLM countries. The third reason is the export volume is typically not large enough to justify the cost of applying for the tariff preference. Okay, the trade across these borders is sometimes is not large enough to justify the cost. So that might explain part of the reason why the utilization rate is so low for these countries. Anyway, the key message for this section is that even though the tariff has been reduced to zero for most tariff lines, but the actual utilization is still low. So why and what could we do about it? Okay. Now on rules of origins. Okay. So this is related to the tariff things, because to be qualified for the tariff preference, you have to prove that your product is produced in Thailand. You have to prove rules of origins. Okay. So for those of you who are not familiar with our rules of origins, it's just this level CC, CTH, CCNP, and etc. are just different kind of rules that producers have to prove to the government officers to be qualified for tariff preference. Okay. So our research question is that suppose Thailand can somehow negotiate with neighboring countries to simplify these rules of origin. Okay. So for example, we have CC. Can we change that to CTH? Which is a simpler RO. Or we have CC and P, which is quite complicated because we have to do both CC and P. Can we take off the NP part and only do the CC part? Okay. Or can we add options to RO? For example, most of the trade in ASEAN areas has VA40 as an RO. Can we add options? Can we add VA40 or CC? So exporters can do both. They can choose to do whichever one they like. Okay. If we can negotiate this, if we can do this, what would be the effect on the trade value? And this is the study results. Okay. So we compare the effect of an increase in trade value between RO simplification and tariff elimination. Okay, to see which one has a bigger impact. So the one with a big green arrow will have a stronger effect on trade. Okay. For example, in the case of AFTA. Interestingly, we found that RO simplification will have a stronger effect in terms of increasing trade compared to elimination of tariff. And this certainly is partly because of the tariff rate of our ASEAN countries is almost zero. The only CLMV countries do have their import tariff. So the effect of tariff elimination might not be much. Okay. But this insights also, we also found that to be true for ASEAN-China FTA. What about Chedtha, Thailand and Japan? For Thailand and Japan, as shown earlier, there are still some tariff barriers. So if we eliminate tariff, the effect on trade we found to be stronger than our simplification. Okay, so tariff is still an issue between the trade between Thailand and Japan. Okay. So those are our findings on ROs. So ROs is important and try to simplify it, whether it's for current FTA or for future FTAs, that we have a significant effect on trade. Okay. So that's our second finding. On the third topic, on the non-tariff measures. Okay. So we know that the tariff rate is approaching zero, but there are NTM, non-tariff measures, that we think will be an important issue in the near future. So we can divide the NTMs into two types. So core NTM and non-core NTM. Core NTM can be called by another name, non-tariff barriers. So change from non-tariff measures to non-tariff barriers, NTBs. These core NTMs typically have more trade restriction effect. Okay, and they are NTMs aimed to protect domestic producers. They are typically non-transparent, involving a lot of judgment. Another type of NTMs is non-core NTMs. These are NTMs that aim to protect consumers and environment. They are typically quite transparent, quite standard, okay, and don't involve much judgment. An example of core NTM might be price control, import quota, or import monopoly. Okay, so in some countries they just monopolize import for some products to strengthen the price, for example. An example of non-core NTM. Non-core NTM is more like an inconvenience in trade, like import registration or some technical measures. Okay. Now what we have done is that we took ASEAN Secretary database on NTMs, and we try to see to what extent these ASEAN countries have implemented NTMs of different types. Okay, so what we found is this slide. So we found that Indonesia, Malaysia, and Vietnam impose a lot of NTBs, non-tariff barriers. Okay. On the other hand, Philippines, Thailand, Brunei, and Singapore imposed a lot of NTMs. Okay, the non-core NTMs. Okay. Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar sort of in the middle, so they just join after, and they have not really imposed that many NTMs. Okay. Let's take a look at the actual figure here in this slide. So this slide shows the proportion of import goods facing at least one NTMs. So for example, 100% means that every single import product for this country will have at least one NTM. Okay, so as you can see, Indonesia imposed the most NTMs, that's 62%. Malaysia is the second, Singapore is the third, Vietnam is Singapore is the third, but most of Singapore NTMs is the non-core NTM to protect consumers and environment. Okay. Thailand is over here, 11%. Okay. Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos is not much, less than 10%. So the key message here is that even though tariff line has been reduced to zero for most products, NTM exists, and it might become an important issue in the future. Okay. On the fourth topic about trade and transport facilitation. Okay, so if we try to divide up the transport modes into air, maritime, and land, and look at the issue of the physical connectivity and institutional connectivity, we have highlighted the key issues for each mode. Okay. So for air and maritime, we think the physical connectivity is fine. We have an acceptable port, acceptable airport, but the issues will be more on the institutional side, the custom procedures. Okay. So I think the key issue for air and maritime will be trade facilitation. And we think the immediate goal should be, we should strive for the national single window, NSW. But for land transportation, I think there are problems in both physical connectivity and institutional connectivity. So we have to do a transport facilitation and improving the whole system. So those are the two key issues that we think are different for different modes of transport. Now on trade facilitation first. We propose that the short-term goal should be national single window, and the long-term goal should be ASEAN single window. So this figure shows, right now we have separate office for customs, immigrations, and quarantine, CIQ. National single window will combine these offices, combine CIQ into one office. Okay. But in the future, ASEAN single window will harmonize CIQ for Thailand with CIQ for other countries. I think that's the way to go. And then in the follow-up slide, I will provide the effect of doing national single window. What about our progress on trade facilitation? So this diagram shows different stages of development for custom procedures, from custom integration and modernization to custom single window, to national single window, and then to ASEAN single window. Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore is over here. So between custom single window and national single window. So we don't really have national single window as yet, but we are moving towards it. Singapore already have one. Singapore already have national single window. Laos and Cambodia is still here. Okay, so in the future we hope we can move to this point. So that's the trade facilitation that still have room for improvement. How about the transport facilitation? So we found that there are two types of agreements related to transport facilitation. The AFTA-related agreements on the top row here, and the GMS-related agreement or the CBTA. Both types of this agreement have been signed, but CBTA have more progress, and there is a full-fledged pilot project on the East-West Economic Corridor. But the key content of these two agreements are similar. So I think we should encourage a full-fledged enforcing of CBTA in the future. So that's our proposition for all the transport facilitation. Okay, now I presented to you that trade and transport facilitation have some problems and there are room for improvement. But what is the effect of these things to the Thai economy? Okay, so we have done a kind of estimation of the effect on Thai economy of the three scenarios. Okay, the first scenario is the tariff reduction. What would happen to the Thai economy if we eliminate tariff for CLV countries, which is scheduled to happen next year? But we don't know whether it's actually going to be realized or not, but it's scheduled next year. Okay, how is that compared to transport facilitation and trade facilitation? Okay, so for transport facilitation, we asked what would happen to the Thai economy if we can improve land transport between Thailand, CLV, and southern China. Okay, for example, if we can reduce land transport costs between Thailand and southern China by 50%, between Thailand and CLV countries by 40%, what would happen to the economy? The third scenario is about trade facilitation. What would happen to the Thai economy if we use NSW, National Single Window? So in this case, we simulate the effect by reducing the shipping cost between ASEAN countries and the rest of the world. For example, if Thailand, Philippines, and Indonesia use NSW, and that results in 8 to 10% cost reduction, what's going to happen to the economy? So these are the three scenarios that we consider and we estimated, and the result is this. So in terms of the effect on GDP growth, this diagram shows the effect on GDP growth for number one, eliminate CLV tariff. Okay, so the effect will be a positive 0.5%, for example. And what is the effect on GDP growth for improving land transport on using NSW? Okay, so 1, 2, 3. And then the combined effect of doing the three things. Okay, so the first insight is that using NSW, this orange bar over here, the third one, will have stronger effect in terms of GDP growth for Thailand than eliminating CLV tariff. Okay. But if we use NSW and we improve land transport, we do two things, do trade and transport facilitation. The combined effect will be more than twice the effect of eliminating CLV tariff. Now, if we do all three things, we eliminate CLV tariff, which is scheduled to happen next year, we improve land transport, and we use NSW, the combined effect will be this red bar over here, which is comparable to the effect of tariff reduction of the original ASEAN 6 countries. Okay, I think this finding is quite striking because if you think about it, the effect of tariff reduction of the original ASEAN 6 countries, we have been doing this for 20 years, right? AFTA started in 1993, and the tariff of the ASEAN 6 countries have been gradually decreased since that time. Right? The total effect on GDP is about 2.25%. That's 20 years effort. But if you do these three things, the effect on GDP is about 1.6%. So I think this provides an interesting quantitative perspective of the importance of trade and transport facilitation. So that's the effect on the Thai economy. What about the effect on other ASEAN economies? Okay, so this diagram shows the effect of Thailand, non-Thailand, CLV, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, and Philippines. The blue bar shows the benefit in terms of monetary value, and the red bar shows the benefit in terms of GDP growth. Okay, so in terms of monetary value, Thailand stands to gain the most. Okay, but in terms of GDP growth, CLV stands to gain the most. Okay, but every country will benefit from trade and transport facilitation. Okay, I think the key message here is that trade and transport facilitation really have a significant effect on economies if we can do it. So in this section I will discuss some policy implications from our findings of the previous 4 issues. Number 1, increased utilization of tariff preference. So we know that the tariff rate have been approaching 0, but the utilization rate is very low. It's less than 50%. Even worse for CLV countries. So how can we increase the utilization of tariff preference? We should improve transparency and reduce judgment in granting tariff preference. Okay. We can provide information and consultation about how to apply for tariff preference to private sectors. We should encourage CLV countries to eliminate tariff according to schedule. Okay, so that might increase the utilization. Secondly, we know that non-tariff measures is becoming more important issues. So we should encourage the elimination of NTMs classified as NTBs. Okay, so the ASEAN Secretary has this office that classify NTMs as NTBs. So those NTMs that have been classified as NTBs should be eliminated. Encourage the use of international standards for sanitary and phytosanitary measures. Okay, to reduce judgment, we have some international standards. Create good surveillance and reporting system when detecting NTBs. Okay, right now there are no one organization in Thailand that when exporters face NTBs they can report to. So there should be this sort of centralized office dealing with this NTB specifically. Thirdly, we should negotiate for more simplified ROs. Okay, whether it's for current FTA or FTA. We found a more simplified RO to have significant impact on trade. Fourthly, we should develop trade facilitation measures. And as I said earlier, short-term goal is to develop e-customs and NSW, National Single Window. For the long-term goal, we should strive for e-customs and ASEAN Single Window, ASW. Finally, I think in terms of transport facilitation, we should encourage the fully enforcing of CBTA conditions, especially on the transshipment, which I agree with the NI team that we may have to provide grants to enabling countries for road infrastructure maintenance. We might have to set up some kind of fees collection for the use of road and infrastructure at borders. So those are the policy implications from our findings. Now for this final section, I want to discuss our further research in this area, which is actually the current project I'm working on, and it is very, very related to the Thailand-Plus-One model. So these are our research questions. So first, we want to know what will be the ASEAN production net, what will ASEAN production networks look like, especially for the GMS area, say in the next 5 to 10 years. Is it going to be the model like Nakabayashi present, like we send some parts for assembly in Cambodia and then send back to Thailand, have some final assembly and then ship to other countries? Is it going to be Thailand to Cambodia, Cambodia to Vietnam, and then Vietnam to other countries? Or is it going to be other models? Okay, so we want to see this picture. How will the picture of production network change? Secondly, we want to know what are the key driving factors for this change in production network. Okay. According to Thailand-Plus-One model, we have 2 factors. We have labor costs and we have the improving conditions, business conditions in neighboring countries, right? There might be other factors. How about cheap raw materials? How about access to market? Right? How important are these factors to the decision to do production network in this region? So that's our second question. Our third question is from Thailand point of view. which high value-added activities will be created or retained in the country. This is actually something we have talked about before. Is it going to be design? Is it going to be technology development that is going to be created or returned in the country? And which activities will be relocated to neighboring countries? Okay. Is it going to be labor-intensive process, or which labor-intensive process? Okay. And finally, if we have some insight from the third question, we should be able to answer the fourth question, which is that what should we do to ensure that we can seize such opportunities and reduce the adverse impacts of this change in production networks? Okay. So that pretty much ends my presentation. I hope that an update on what we have done in this area will provide a complementary to Thailand-Plus-One model. At least it should provide a context in terms of the regional connectivity, different issues, and I really look forward to your future research results and our future collaboration. Okay, thank you. I guess I have to be a moderator as well. I would really appreciate comments, questions, please.
Thank you very much for a very, very insightful research. And I think it's very relevant to the business that is being conducted today. We at the Federation also are very much in agreement with most of the findings here. However, I have a number of comments and a number of questions. For example, the graph about the tariff barrier between Thailand and FTA partners being less important issue. The tariff rates of most trading goods between Thailand and FTA partners. You mentioned in the top here that very few remaining positive tariff lines. But I sense that the graphic representation is rather related to the trade value. It's not percentage of the tariff lines, but the percentage of the trade value, and hence the percentage, the lower percentage of Japanese imports, the Thai imports from Japan, being mostly in automotive industry. So that remains taxable. That there's still tariff for automotive parts and also automobiles. So that is why the percentage of Thai imports from Japan, the percentage of the zero tariff is still lower than the Thailand exporting to Japan. That is my comment. And for the rules of origin, actually the substantial transformation rules of origin has been in use for quite some time. And actually, if you look at the agreements for ASEAN countries for products in the textile category, both rules are admissible. Both, yes. So we have been looking at this, well, by coming from the textile industry, we have been looking at this for quite some time, and there has not been much use, much application for the substantial transformation. One noticeable observation is that for Chedtha, the rules of origin for textile materials, for textile products, is based basically on the substantial transformation rather than values.
And values.
Yes.
And the substantial transformation have not been used much?
For Chedtha, yes, it has been used. But I would say that for ASEAN, for example, it's not being used much because not many people went through the understanding process of the CTH and CC and all these terms. But it exists. It is there because we realize that ASEAN countries, we do not have the first stage raw materials, especially, for example, the cotton. We have to import cotton, so the raw material has to be imported. So it doesn't make sense if we choose the rules of origin, to be just the value, the percentage of the domestic product. So that is why we have the option of substantial transformation as well.
And yet it's not being utilized much.
Yet it's not being utilized much because not many people understand what it is. But I agree with you that it should provide a good option, because you're right in saying that for the CLM countries, it is quite difficult, especially for the cross-border trade and smaller trade volumes, that it is very difficult to come up with the exact structure or cost structure of the production. So that's why the ad valorem rule of origin cannot be used because they cannot provide the structure or the evidence as to the structure. So in that case, if we allow them to use the CC or CTH, the substantial transformation, it might actually help. Yeah. All right, that's.
Thank you very much. That's certainly very insightful from practitioners, and we will certainly incorporate that in our communication. For the import from Japan, we might think about the number of tariff lines, the ratio of tariff lines that have zero tariff. For textile, or that's certainly an insight. That CC is an option, but not many people use it because people don't understand it. Yes, please.
Can you please explain the national single window? Does that mean that to integrate custom immigration and quality into something like a one-stop shop or something like that? And also like the ASEAN single window, are there plans in the ABC plan to achieve that goal in the future?
Yeah. There are actually some schedule to implement ASEAN single windows on the AC blueprint. Okay, but the progress on that front, I think, is still not much. Okay, so essentially, ASEAN single windows will standardize the CAQ of different countries. We have similar forms, so we can do at one country, and then the goods can flow to the whole region. But the progress on that front is not much, as far as I know. Any other comments or questions? Yes, please.
Harmonization of rules or standards or those things among ASEAN countries may be quite difficult. My question as a Japanese from outside ASEAN country, how will you achieve the, like a single ASEAN window or this type of harmonization among countries? Even ASEAN secretariat, they do not have much right power to enforce these harmonization to each countries. Do you have any ideas for that?
That's sort of hitting the heart of the problem.
I'm sorry.
We actually have a few trips to Indonesia, and we actually talked to the ASEAN Secretary Office, and we really did find that problem. It's really difficult for harmonizing stuff in ASEAN. I agree with you that the ASEAN single window is a challenging task, because even national single window is difficult. To combine maybe 30 offices into one is not a daunting task, and then we're going to combine this office among countries. And the ROOs, the ATMs. The ATMs is even more complicated and sensitive issues. Our field trip to Indonesia, we found that we talked to many Indonesian governments. So Indonesia is the country that imposed the most ATM measures, and we found that the ATM of Indonesia officers, they don't think that their ATMs are NTBs, and they think there are good reasons to impose it for social benefits. But really, for some measures, we disagree. So I agree that it's difficult, and I don't know. ASEAN Secretary has some measures to report ATMs when you detect it, but it has not been so successful. Okay, we try to discuss this at many levels, and it has not been very successful. Maybe other people can share insight on this. It's okay. Other questions, comments on this? Okay. Yes, please.
I have a question. I think this study is quite interesting, and it should be very important and useful for ASEAN, intra-ASEAN things. I'm just wondering whether this study includes its ASEAN relationship with China in terms of logistics and production networks, especially as you may know, China is expanding its territories geographically and effectively. So I'm wondering if, as you see, the northern part of the Laos and Myanmar is more faster connecting to integrating into China economically nowadays. So I'm wondering how, if that part of the effects or the impacts are going to study or assess.
Certainly, we have we consider China in our past studies. For example, in this simulation here, we also consider the decrease in land transport between Thailand and China, Thailand and southern China, by 50%. What will happen? Okay. And we also compute the effect of RO simplifications between ASEAN and China. So this is ASEAN-China FTA. So we find that if we can simplify ROs between ASEAN and China, then we have a stronger effect compared to the elimination of tariff. We also compute the tariff preference utilization. Unfortunately, we didn't show China here, but we also compute the tariff preference utilization between Thailand and China by sector and by product. So that the general picture is the same. It's not much, about like 50, 60%, I guess, a little bit higher than the average ASEAN.
Do you also include India in your?
Yes, yes. We compute the utilization rate between Thailand and India, Thailand and China, Thailand and Japan, New Zealand, Australia, and ASEAN countries at sector levels and at product levels.
maybe in about 5-10 years, RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, will be enforced in the region. In that case, not only China but also India will participate in the FTA network in the region. And nowadays, Thailand is sort of Detroit in Asia, but in terms of commercial vehicles, they are also producing a lot of commercial vehicles and try to export to other countries, including the ASEAN countries. So you may not ignore the India's influence to the ASEAN countries in 5-10 years.
Actually, right now there is what we call a notables effect. Right? There are many cross FTAs. Right. So between Thailand and Japan, we have we have these different FTAs between the two countries, and private sectors can choose which tariff preference they will use for what FTAs, and we compute that the utilization rate for different FTAs, and these findings are for AFTA, which is the main FTA that is being utilized. Okay, I guess that would conclude our workshop today. So I would like to thank you once again for sharing with us a very insightful preliminary research question. We really look forward for the final result of this project, and we really look forward for future cooperation. And thank you very much for everyone for coming today. I hope you learned something. I myself have learned a lot. Thank you very much.